All right, we're going to move on right away to, if it'll let me, there we go. Thoughtful questions. The following are opening questions and points for reflection on Romans 13 from Men's Bible Study perspective. Keep in mind, we do not expect you to know right or wrong or anything. I just want to know what your opinions are on this. So, submission and authority. According to Romans 13:1, to whom are we to be subject? Why is that important?
You're supposed to be subject to God.
To God?
Well, it says that Rome also, that Rome, pay Rome what is Rome.
Right. You're right on. And Paul even says that in Romans, saying that we're going to get into that. What does it mean to resist authority, and what are the consequences for according to Romans 13:2?
Well, if you know it's not God's will, that's what he's talking about, resisting. But if you
Mhm.
resist, be prepared to take the consequences.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Other comments? None? How can understanding the concept of God's minister, Romans 13:4, shape the view of government officials? How could that be?
How they
They
react
all
to
should be
situations.
looking through the lens, the lens of, of morality of Christ.
Hmm.
Basically, every decision a government official makes, ideally, that would be the lens they're looking through.
Yeah.
Right.
Besides fearing punishment, what is another crucial reason to submit to authority, as mentioned in Romans 13:5? You kind of already answered that. They're in a position of authority, then that position of authority is one God has granted. So if you're fearing punishment, you fear God's wrath also.
Yeah.
Justice and responsibility. What is the primary role governing authorities according to Romans 13:3-4? How does this align with God's justice? If nobody has an answer, that's fine. You will by the end. What does Paul's instruction about paying taxes, Romans 13, and you spoke to this, Tom, reveal about responsibilities as a citizen?
He said, whose head is on a coin? He said, Caesar's, and give to Caesar what is Caesar's.
Yeah,
Hmm.
you are a scholar.
Yeah.
All
Hmm.
right, you're right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Citizenship on earth and in heaven, earthly address and heavenly address. The separation of church and state is foundational principle in the United States, enshrined in the First Amendment of the Constitution. I would just put in here in a footnote is that the fact that, again, like I said, that Paul was in a certain situation with the Roman government, we at this time when the Constitution is being written, we're at a different time in history, and many of the people coming to this country, no matter how small it was at the time, they were escaping the persecution of their own religion, of where they're at. The majority of these people were Christians. They had different religions, but they were Christians. This amendment has two key parts: the Establishment Clause, which prohibits the government from establishing an official religion or favoring one religion over another, and the Free Exercise Clause, which protects individuals' right to practice their religion freely. If you read world history, you will see that in France and England and all the different countries that had monarchy, the monarchs decided what was going to be the religion. And that's what you would have to practice. You would have to become the religion that was in England or the religion that was in France. And that's the way it was. You didn't have a choice. This is the way it was. And you could be actually killed, assassinated, guillotined in France for not following that rule. The phrase separation of church and state itself was famously used by Thomas Jefferson in 1802, letter to the Danbury Baptists, where he described the First Amendment as building a wall of separation between church and state. This idea, however, has been a source of ongoing debate and legal challenge throughout American history, with different interpretations regarding the proper extent of this separation. Those completely on I hope I get this, completely on the left have kind of seen this, that the religion is to be taken out of the schools, out of the anywhere. And you don't see it on the property of anybody where people pay taxes. You can't see, celebrate Christmas. You can't, those kind of go on. The other side is that is not what it meant. What it meant is that the government could not determine what religion you were going to be practicing, period. And the government wouldn't set up a one nation religion. That's on the right. So you got the left and the right, and that's kind of where those interpretations are at and where we go. I would suspect that most of us would probably be more on the right in this Bible study, with the fact that we would like to see prayer back in the schools. We would like to see a little more where we were at one time. We've seen this gradually go away. Thoughtful questions, learning to live, responsibility. It says arguments for separation of the church and state. One is protecting religious freedom. Separation ensures that individuals are free to practice their beliefs or lack thereof without government coercion or interference, fostering an environment of tolerance and respect for diverse faiths. So if in Congress they're not talking about religion, they're not talking about religion as a president, out of mind, out of sight. How do you feel about that?
Didn't say you can't talk about religion or share about your faith or any of those things.
No.
That should be fine to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. One is saying that if I was on the left, I was saying, look, we aren't talking about it. We aren't voting on it. We aren't doing anything with it because we're not going to, because it, you can practice whatever. You can practice Satanism. I mean, we don't care. That is basically what that's saying. They're going to stay out of it completely. Next one, preventing religious coercion. When church and state are intertwined, there's a risk that the government might impose religious beliefs or practices on citizens, undermining personal autonomy and potentially marginalize those with different beliefs.
Risk is there.
Yep.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And it's scary on the power mongers that would take over, that would see that as an avenue to take.
Yep.
We have seen it. Hitler was one that did it. He took obviously used a scapegoat of the Jews and did that very thing. And really, really began to tell the people that all the issues of the world were part of the Jewish religion. And it was the Jews that caused it. And we were going to have a new society. We're going to get rid of them. But they were practicing Jews. Promoting equality and diversity. A secular society ensures that all citizens are treated equally, regardless of their religion affiliation. Comments about that one?
I think the big issue is defining equality.
Yes.
I don't think there's any issue with diversity. And it's how some people might define it, which in essence sometimes causes discrimination, actually, by the basis of race or religion.
Well,
Very good.
You can't give advantages to a certain group in the name of equality.
Right. Well, the equality, and again, we sit here as Christians, and our idea of equality is so much different than, they say, a Muslim jihad. They are outright, totally ready to murder every Christian in sight. So what's the equality of saying, okay, that's fine. You're my neighbor and you're jihad. I'm glad to have you next door. That's probably not going to happen. Because the ultimate goal is to rid the world of Christians. So the quality of their practice, and we used to say this in Bible studies of past and ones were face to face, is that one of the biggest issues in the world is religion. If everybody could be Jesus and God and Christian and you know, if the Apostle Paul didn't go up and say, well, I'm Catholic. He did say he was Jewish, but he did say he was Christian. He went from being Jewish to being a solid Christian. Preventing political corruption of religion. Mixing politics and religion can corrupt religious institutions by causing them to defend unpopular or unholy clauses to maintain power or influence. I found that one interesting because when you're preventing political corruption of a religion, so what you do is you just ban it from everywhere. Schools, anything that's where there's taxes involved, they're banned. And that's considered no influence, but there is a tremendous amount of influence if you look at how this country was.
On the other end of the stick, though, I have to say, we talk about a church and the separation of church and state and all that other stuff. I think that church leaders are required by God to stand up for Christian principles. If the state is doing something, you pick out whatever you want that is abhorrent today, that's condoned by the government. I think it's a good Christian church's responsibility to say, hey, that's not what God teaches.
Mm-hmm.
What's been
Everyone agree?
Just keep it out of the name of any particular political party, and you're probably okay.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if you're okay, but I think today and I have a limited scope, but I think a lot of so-called Christian leaders are afraid to say anything. They'd rather just say, ignore it.
the challenge, I
Agree.
think, is the way they define certain things, because language has been converted to mean different than what many people may interpret it. So you
True.
can have something that sounds like they're advocating for real positive Christian value, but the way that's being done doesn't necessarily reflect that. So that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges, because I can see it in churches also kind of sometimes moving to ways that in itself sounds good, but may not necessarily reflect the outcome Jesus would want.
I think so.
I think of abortion was quite a topic. I
Mhm.
don't know. It's a-
No, absolutely, Mike. That's
yeah,
correct.
I
And
don't know.
when we're looking at this from the political government, I wrote an article this last week. If you want to get on the blog and read it, I loved it because it separated what was happening at this time with the early constitutional deliverers. There's what was considered to be a statesman. And then later in life, we went from statesmen, even though they like to call themselves statesmen, they went over to what they call as a politician. So what is the difference between a statesman and a politician? If you read the article, it will tell you. But it is really came out well because there is a major difference between the two.
Mhm.
We need spacemen now, don't we?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Their focus was on that. It was about, I mean, without getting into the article, they are much heavily or more involved with not party, but with what's good for the country. I was going to say this to the end, but where we're at right now, I'm just going to throw it out. You're all right on target. What is really simple here is the fact is that when any government is doing anything, God is never going to agree with anything that's against God. So the simple measure is the fact that if you're making God smile, that's a good deal. If you're making God frown, that's not a good deal. So you're right, Marv, when we are of the same faith and a Christian side, if somebody is making God frown, then we as leaders, our pastors, our congregations, our Christians in general need to stand up And what we're finding is that we think even with politicians, they may be afraid to do that. Because if I do that, go back to what I was saying a long time ago when I was going to DC and spoke to some of these people, they'd say, you know, well, I give a little here because if I give here, they will vote for my bills. And that's not being a statesman, by the way.
Follow the money.
Yeah. Or they're afraid they won't get reelected.
Yeah.
Man,
Arguments against strict separation. Some argue that for a more integrated approach, highlighting the historical foundations of the United States and Judeo-Christian values, you notice the Jewish is in there, Judeo-Christian values. Some argue that more integrated approach. What's that mean?
but you can have some woven together. You can have
Yeah.
some moral.
You can recognize it. You can allow it to happen. You can't
Yeah.
punish people for it. So, you know, so they're saying, hey, let's not do this strict separation thing. I remembered on Wednesdays, I've always told this story, probably told it before. If I haven't, you know, I'm happy that you're going to hear it first time. And if you're not, you're going to hear it again. But on Wednesdays, when I was in junior high school, all the ministers would come to the junior high school from our little town of Red Oak, which is, you know, basically German Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, Catholic. They would come to the school, and those that had no religion or didn't want to do anything at all would go to study hall, which, man, you know, that didn't sound fun to me. But fortunately, I was a Lutheran, so our Lutheran minister would meet with the Lutherans. In a town like Red Oak, which was mainly Swede and German, that was a big group. But we would have our lessons and they only would be, I think it was only like an hour. But the pastors would come and take an hour of the day on Wednesdays, and we would have that day always. Well, today, my goodness sakes, they'd be thrown out the door. They'd be in jail. You couldn't do that today, but that's how I grew up. We always had that. Wednesdays were just sacred. No school coach or person would have any activities on Wednesday nights because that was set aside for all the activities at the church for the young people. So that was another thing that was done. So when we look at this strict arguments against strict separation, that's what that's saying here is that you could do those things. You couldn't even be counted. Let's say that there was something going on and the coach said, look, I don't care. I'm going to have my practice and you be here. And they are not there. You cannot punish them for that. You cannot take attendance and say you're absent because they were in a church.
We used to call it Luther League.
Yeah, it was Luther League.
Yeah.
And I trying to think that Methodists called it CCA or something like that. But they all had their own acronyms. And Luther League was what we called ours. And you know what? I grew up, again, never missing that. That was kind of the social body of the school or the community when you went to those things.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
others argue that the phrase separation of church and state is not explicitly in the Constitution and that a complete removal of religion from public life goes too far. I know you all have opinions on this.
I think you got total agreement on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. But the silence is just like, okay, I can read your mind, guys.
Yeah.
Some scholars believe that the concept of separation actually originated as the attempt to protect religion from government interference. You think that's true?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it
Yeah.
is true.
Probably.
Yeah, I do too. And and they had the old, they probably had relatives that had been, completely killed from the fact they practiced a different religion, and whether you're from France or Belgium or Sweden or people were running from Europe because of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, the ghettos of New York City and all the big cities that were forming from where these immigrants were coming in, you'll see that these people that had similar languages, similar faiths were congregating in their own little areas of the city.
Right. Mhm.
Exactly.
All right. Concerns have been raised that strict secularism could be seen as an anti-religious and alienate faith communities. Well, you all have your own. The one thing once you give somebody something, you can't take it back. You've all had the freedom. And if somebody came in and said, starting on next Monday, we have voted at the state legislature that you will all now be Catholics. Yeah, that isn't going to float. And that is what that's saying. That's strict secularism, that somebody's going to decide who you are or what you're going to. Where we've got ourselves into some issues is there's been a wide divide of some of the religions that have come into this country, and mainly Middle Eastern. If you look at what we're talking about, we have the cults, but I'm talking about actual religions that have been practiced over hundreds of years. People of the immigrant coming from Mexico and coming from El Salvador and South America, many of those are Catholics that are coming in and they would practice and believe in Catholic religion. So they're not involved in the middle of this. They may not be practicing, but that's what they are. So the ongoing debate reflects a dynamic interplay between religion and government in American society, with differing views on how balance the protection of religious freedom and we need to neutral and inclusive government. Now, all I will say about that last one is we can pretend that our faith is not involved in the government, but it is.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
There are a lot of Americans, especially millennials and other young people, who don't believe religion and politics mix very well. The notion of separation of church and state has served this country well for almost 240 plus years. I'm not saying, this is something I copied, by the way, it's not me. I am not saying there is no place for God in the public square, because I understand that the Constitution was written by men who believed in God or who believed that God exists. But I am saying that these men did not believe that there should be a state religion or that one religion was more important than another religion. They were all about freedom of religion and freedom from religion. The operative word for the founders was freedom.
That's good.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's true. You know, I get terribly frustrated if I go to a Catholic mass, if I go to a Catholic funeral. Why? Because I'm treated differently. I believe in God. I worship God. You all know that you're all holy men, but if you are not Catholic and you go to a Catholic church, if it's a strict Catholic, I've found both, by the way, but when they do communion, if you're not a Catholic, you cross your arms to let them know you're not Catholic, and they will not give you communion.
Right.
And if you don't cross your arms and you take communion, then you'll feel the wrath of God because of that. That's by the Catholics.
There's even a lot of Catholics that can't take communion, depending on the level of sin.
Yep.
That's true.
Yep.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
If
when
got divorced,
the words that for our pastor, when every week, whoever says it, Liz or John or whoever, the guys that go to Bethany, you notice they always say that we have open communion.
Yep.
It's for everybody.
Yes.
I tell you, not all Lutheran churches do that, though.
Yeah,
True.
the German Lutherans are a little stricter on that, but
Uh,
I always go back and look at God and the Last Supper and around the table. You had a bunch of hoodlums around that table. You had and I mean that in the best interest of who they were, but you had poor people and wealthy people, and you had tax collectors, and you had Simon the Zealot, who was ready to kill anybody that was going to be against Christians. And when you look around that table, Jesus didn't go, by the way, you can't take communion here. Don't take this as the body of Christ. Don't take this as my blood, because you know, you're horrible. We can't let you do it. So that I've always gone with that. I think it is open. I think it's better when you understand it.
Gotcha.
Oh, and it's the same thing with other rules, like, I had to get my nephew's baby baptized in our church because they're open to bringing anybody into the church, and some of them won't, depending on
Yeah.
certain rules you have to follow.
Yeah.
So,
Good
Right.
point.
Right.
that's
And
what-
back to what Raul was saying, I know that in our Lutheran church, you were, it was open communion, but you would have had to been through confirmation
Yeah.
to
Right.
take communion.
Yep.
If before that you would go up for communion and they would bless you, but they wouldn't
Yep.
give you communion until your confirmation. Confirmation was a big deal in those days.
Yeah.
You'd get done with your confirmation and you'd have the day where they celebrated that. You took your first communion. It's a big deal then.
They were tied together, communion and confirmation. Now it's
Yep.
separate, taking
Yep.
communion classes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And this is just me. I mean, I don't want to debate it, but when I see some young kid go up and take communion and have no idea what it means,
Right.
they're just doing it from the practice. They're not doing it from the actual meaning of what it is. So,
I feel the same, but then when I think about it, I think there's some adults probably doing the same thing.
Well,
So,
the
Yeah.
parents of those kids are, because they haven't explained to those kids what it's all about. So the parents don't know
Yeah.
either.
mm,
you would
Well-
hope that would help in their spiritual life, though, even though they don't.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like,
Learn that.
Right.
again, we're like sheep. When you say, "Hey, come down, drink this," it's going to make you younger. People knocking you down just to get down there and taste this juice. It's making you younger.
Well, you kind of
Yeah.
stand out if you don't. You
Oh.
can tell the pew visiting Catholic because they stay in the pews.
Yeah. One other thing I admire, and I've
Mhm.
not seen it in every church, and we've been in a few, but our church will come to you if you can't go down. And
Yeah.
I remember many years ago when farmers get old and decrepit and they can't. You used to have walk down as a group. You all knelt as a group, and then you'd all have your communion. And then
Mhm.
you get up, and the next group would come down.
Yes.
Yeah.
And some farmers just couldn't kneel, and they didn't go down. And I don't ever remember anybody going out to them while they were sitting. But that's
Mhm.
changed, because you do have people that can't come down and they can't even walk down, let alone kneel. I did appreciate, though, as a young man, the kneeling. I don't know why, but you went down and you kneeled, and the pastor and his
Oh,
assistant
yeah.
would come along the line and
Yeah.
give you each communion, and then you'd get up and go. Now, when you get congregations as big as what ours is, you'd be there till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So
Mhm.
can't do it.
Still
And they
hard
Here's
to adjust not having a pastor give you communion. It's still not quite adjusted.
I
to
know
that.
that.
Mhm.
And what you have to do, that's one thing I will help, but I can't give communion because it just doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
No, you're right on. I feel the same way. For most of my life as a
Right.
young man, my communion was always given to me by the pastor. Now, what makes this interesting to me is that if I go to Arlington, Nebraska with my mother-in-law, the pastor gives you communion.
Mhm.
If you go to a small church,
Yep.
you will get communion by your pastor.
Yep.
If you go to a large church, a mega church, that does not happen.
Yeah, worship assistants.
Yeah.
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 In our church, they do yet. If you want, you can't go up there. I think some people might come down to you yet, but they still have it. They did during COVID yet. They have no little wines and wafers in there, and you pick up yourself when you walk in, sit down. If you don't want to go up in there in the front, it's up to you if you want that. Or if you can't do it, they can have an usher hand it to you too. That way, they do that to you. Take it that way too, and they do that yet at our church.
Well, our church
Yeah.
has you can get it from him or her if you're gluten free.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a sin if we lied. So if we're not gluten free, so we go up and take communion from the pastor.
Yeah. I was thinking, why not?
If you'd
Who
wanted to
cares?
get it from the pastor, you could just go get it gluten free and do it that way.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
true.
Wow. We just started, you know what? Wait
Here
until
we
you see
go.
that line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I should be gluten-free anyway, so I should go up there.
Yeah.
We'll be right
So,
behind you.
yeah. Yeah. And see, Debbie, my wife, always goes up to John and gets it because she's gluten free.
Yeah.
So, yeah, if you wanted to get it from your pastor instead of all these people, you could do it. And, you know, I almost would like to see that and see their faces when there's, you know, 100 people in line waiting to see the pastor. For health reasons, I'm here, but mainly I'm here because I want you to do it. So,
Yeah.
That's
let
good.
everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. That first verse in chapter 13 is pretty much says it all. That if anybody sets an authority, if a government official, God has put him there. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong, do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? So in other words, you want to follow God's wishes, you want to follow God's commandments, you want to follow what God has asked us to do. He's not asking you to say if you got a ruler that's not following that, to say, okay, it's okay. I'm going to go ahead and murder people. I'm going to go ahead and steal. I'm going to lie. You know, covet my neighbor. I love and not love my neighbor. That's not what he's saying. He's saying you want to do those things, but those things that belong to that government, like what was mentioned by Tom, is that coin that had Caesar's picture on it. That belongs to Caesar. So fine, go ahead, pay your taxes with Caesar's dollars. But no, God doesn't have that tax. Do you want to be free from the fear of one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. And that is from God Himself. So, for the one authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment to the wrongdoers. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of the possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. What I thought of when I saw this is I saw when we had the Ten Commandments, everything in law is pretty much multiplied off those commandments in itself, and then those things that we have viewed that were wrong. So we've made them into a law. And so when you look at God's laws, when it comes to being a good servant to God, those are God's laws. Those outside of that are just basically our own. Authorities are appointed by God, and those who resist the authorities resist God. This will bring judgment of them. That point is, the fact is, when you get somebody that's a dynamic leader that is not following God's wishes, their punishment will come, not by us, but by God. There's a picture of that. I just found a picture of the coin that Tom, you were talking
Oh,
about.
yeah.
That particular coin, and since it's an original, is worth millions. So if you could get one of those, you'd be set up for life.
Yeah.
Been out of shape.
We have to
Of
get
course, the
picture of it.
government here would take 50% of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least.
Yeah. This also why you pay taxes for the authorities and God's servants who give their full time to governing. And so we got to set up these systems which we want, fire, police, all of that pays for those things that are good things. Give to everyone what you owe them, and if you owe taxes, pay taxes. If you revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Then we have lost some of that at the end when I thought respect and honor, those two. I can remember my dad not agreeing with. I mean, he's a patriot. Mother was too, but they, even though the person they did not vote for at the time, still would be honored by them and respected by them because they won.
Yeah.
And today, snide remarks and bad feelings, and it comes from our leaders. I will say that too. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be are summed up in as one command: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. That's a tough one. We've talked about it before.
Yeah.
Love your neighbor. And that isn't just talking about the person that lives next door. Even though it does include them, it's much broader than that. So
It is tough. I'll tell you what, especially when you have I'll just throw this out. When you have a president, no matter who it is, that is doing things that you know are not right or you feel is not right,
Yeah.
love
Yeah.
him.
yeah.
That's a tough one.
It's tough every single day. I'm going to give you an example of yesterday when I was on the phone with my son and I was helping him. I testified by Zoom and he could not get on from his house. And I said, why don't you just come over here? And he said, well, I can't. And my ex-wife, his mother was there with him. And I think that's probably why he couldn't come. But I said, oh, okay, then, I'm going to do it myself then. But if you want, you can come and be on it with me.
Yeah.
And I heard her in the background say, just get off the phone. He's doing you no good.
Jeez.
So, love thy neighbor, love thy neighbor. Where's it
Yeah.
at? Love thy neighbor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going, okay. I said, I heard that comment, Aaron. I said, this is the deal. You can pick your mom. You have her help. She can help you with your Zoom and you can go from there and I'm done. Or you can pick me. And that was not fair. That was not fair for me to do that. And I know that after I was all over. So then later we talked and he said, that's just mom. She blows off the mouth all the time. And, I don't listen. I said, I know, but I shouldn't have said what I said. So he said, well, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to pray for her. I'm going to pray that she gets a kinder heart. So
Hard. Hard.
it did come around, and God, by tapping me on the head, said, hey, that is not right. And I recognized it. But how many of us in our day to day have those feelings? And if you just say to yourself, I'm not going to let this affect me negatively, I'm going to pray for that person. I'm going to pray for that person to get a kinder heart. Comments?
Good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Good.
And our bodies are built that we respond to stress. And when stress hits, that's, that was a stressful moment. And I spoke to it and said, look, I'm taking my time. I'm here. I love my grandson. I'm more than happy to testify. And I would tell you, the judge was extremely nice to me, was happy to have me on, and listened. And, I was worried about that. I really was. I was worried the fact that she'd say, look, you can't, this is a pre-trial hearing. We're not going to talk about evidence and get all this stuff. I knew that, but she didn't know I knew that. So I thought she'd give me all that. She didn't. She was very kind to me and said, hey, we're happy to hear you. Happy to hear what you have to say. Would you please go ahead and we'll listen. And she did. And she thanked me. So, and I believe me, I thank God in my prayers that it turned out that way, because I've been in courtrooms where judges are not as nice.
Right.
And they do tell you you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. So did not turn out that way, though.
Yeah.
All right. Love fulfills the law. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments: you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be summed up is the command, love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. So we can talk about a lot of different things in here, but what God is really looking is for the law. The day is near. Now, I was going to say here, well, I'm not going to, because I'm going to move along, but the day is near, what that means is in that verse 11, and do this understanding the present time, the hour has already come for you to wake up from your slumber, because your salvation is nearer than now when you first believe. So no matter when Jesus comes back, guys, every day that goes by, it's a day nearer. The night is nearly over. The day is almost here. So let us put aside the deeds of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us behave decently and as in the daytime, not in carousing and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality and debauchery, not in dissension and jealousy. Rather, clothe yourself with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. What is your role in government? 5 points. Let every soul be subject to governing authorities. Verse 5. Therefore, you must be subject. You're subject to those things that they make into law. What does subject mean? Submit to. It means submit in Greek. Voluntary attitude of cooperation. Help carry a burden. You know, a lot of times when we hear these fights in the legislature and the Congress, really what we need to do is find the appropriate system that allows us to communicate what we want to be heard. Christians were being viewed very suspiciously. Paul felt they should be viewed as good citizens with their faith in God, who was government at the time of Paul. Paul wrote Romans in 58 AD, and then 6 years later in 64 AD, there was a great fire. Now, y'all know about the fire in Rome? The entire city caught on fire. The entire city burnt. Now,
As Nero played.
yeah. And Nero said, there was many people that said he loved building. He loved construction, kind of like Herod was. And so what he did, some people felt that he actually burnt the city down himself. But he in turn, kind of like Hitler did, blamed the entire fire on the Christians.
Yep.
And said the Christians did it. And so people outright began murdering Christians, crucifying Christians over this fire. During this rebuild, this is this note on the bottom, and I think I told somebody this the other day, that Caesar loved chariot races. So they had these chariot races. He built a stadium for chariots, and you've seen that in the movies, where they race these chariots around and around and around. And he did it in the daytime. And he said, you know what? It would be great if we could do this at night. But, you know, they didn't have electricity. They didn't have Edison then. And so they had no light bulbs. So what he did is they captured Christians, impaled them on poles, covered them with pitch, and lit them on fire. And they had the races.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Unbelievable. A lot of so-called religious people make God small, petty, and intolerant. Politics has always been a dirty business, but it appears to be getting dirtier every day. That is why politics and religion would not appear to mix very well. Religion is supposed to appeal to our better angels, but that is not the case today. Angels is what that says, but it is not the case today. The merging of politics and religion has not been good for the country, because it blurs the lines of what is acceptable and what is not.
Yeah. Yep.
Agreement. Good.
Yep.
I agree.
All right, this is short, not very long.
Pastor John, do the rather strong words in Romans 13, verses 1 through 7, indicate that civil disobedience is always wrong for the Christian?
I don't think Romans 13, the first paragraph there, rules out all civil disobedience. Let me read just a piece of it because it sounds like it does, and I admit it's a significant exegetical problem. So it says, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God. So be subject because authorities are from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. So there's the basic statement. We ought to be submissive to government because government is of God and it's a gift of God. Sometimes people who get their back up real quick and want to plead for civil disobedience
Yeah, I mean, it's asking for a password for some reason.
before they think too much, forget that anarchy and mob rule are horrible, horrible things. I remember watching the movie Gandhi and those couple of scenes where the mobs got out of hand and turned on a man, and the terror that came over me just watching the power of a totally lawless mob. You are utterly helpless. And so government, in keeping a cap on the evil of the world and restraining evil and bringing some kind of order, is a great gift in a world of fallenness. So I just want to say yes to God's gift of government in a world of sin. But we all know World War II, Nazism, Pol Pot, all kinds of illustrations from history that government can go wrong, which makes verse 3 and 4 look really strange. And I think this is a clue to what Paul is up to. Rulers are not a terror to good, but to bad. And we read that and we say, Paul, how can you possibly say that? You're being thrown in jail every other week, and Jesus was crucified by governments. What do you mean they're not a terror to good conduct, but to bad? And then he goes on and says, you'll receive their approval if you do what is good. In verse 4, they are God's servant for good, and they are an avenger to carry out God's wrath on the wrongdoer. And that's the argument for why we should be submissive. And we say, well, if the argument is so weak, how does the conclusion follow? I think Paul, if he heard us say that, he would say, listen, here's what I'm doing. Number one, Caesar is going to read this, and I want to make sure that the ruling authorities in Rome know that Christians are not anarchists. We are basically law-abiding citizens, and we believe that he has his position by God. That's the first thing. And the second thing, I think he wants Christians to say, don't get your back up so easily, because being wronged by a government sends nobody to hell, but being rebellious and angry and bitter and spiteful does send people to hell. And so it's a much greater evil for you to be rebellious than for the government to mistreat you. A much greater evil for you, that is. Now, if you step back from Romans 13 and say, are there any appropriate acts of civil disobedience? There are. I mean, Acts 5:29, I think it is, where it says we must obey God rather than men. The apostles must preach because the authorities have told them they shouldn't. And then we have the example of the midwives in Exodus, where they wouldn't kill the baby boys. And we have Daniel, who right after they make the law that you can't pray, he goes up and kneels down in front of a window and gets thrown into a lion's den. And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego won't bow down to the big golden statue. And Esther is told by Mordecai, you got to go to the king because we're all going to be killed if you don't go to the king. And she writes back and says, you can't go to the king. It's against the law if you go to the king unbidden. And he writes back and says, we're going to die anyway. And she says, okay, if I perish, I perish. And she breaks the law. He mercifully raises the golden scepter, and she's spared. But she was willing to risk breaking the law for the sake of her people. And so I think the principle is this. citizens to governments, children to parents, wives to husbands, church members to elders, all of those are called to have an appropriate submissive spirit and to follow leadership. None of those is considered to be absolute. All of them have the lordship of Jesus riding over the lordship of the superior, and thus defining the limits of the lordship of the superior.
Thank you, Pastor John, and thank you for listening to this podcast. Email your questions to us at askpastorjohn@desiringgod.org. You can find thousands of other free resources online from John Piper at desiringgod.org. I'm your host, Tony Reinke. Thanks for listening.
All right. Kind of wraps it up in a summary for us. I'm going to actually shut off, like Tom's good suggestion for not recording, and stop recording.